this is this fantastic Warminster thing, and it's the hotel in the middle of Warminster, and there's lots of people having a good time, and we're about to start the second part of the day. Ben Hospitalport is here. Some very exciting people happening here, and it's generally absolutely brilliant. So we're going to go in, start the second part of the day, and welcome to the thing in Warminster.
Tremendous amount to this, and a lot of his own money, and was in fact facing a terrible loss on this event at one time. Fortunately, due to the sun and a bit of PR, that has come good. Now, I thought I'd dress in uniform today, just to show you that MIB do exist, not an urban myth. We will be going into information 2 levels deeper than the President of the United States currently. Pay serious attention to this information. For those who are here from the MOD, I welcome them. There are 2. I know who you are. I will not identify you. It was my job for 50 years. Now you are doing it, not me. I retired last year. This is a bit deeper than Nick Poe. Lots of things are deeper than Nick Poe. Nick does a good job. Right. Now we have a minor problem with vision here, but I'm hoping you can see. I don't trust electronics, so I use manual method. Let's see if we can do this. I'm right-handed. These silly things up. My mission is to save this planet. Your mission is to help me. Your mission is to tell the world what is going on now, because the now is highly irrelevant. You do not have much now left. This is not an overstatement. The net is full of doomsayers. I am an optimist. I've always been an optimist. I started advising Her Majesty's government when I was 17 years old, when I gave to Sir Zuckerman the current oil pollution clean-up techniques for free. They were sold to the BP Oil 1 year later for £250,000, when £250,000 was a lot of money. I gave that. I have given a lot. Today, we're going to cut to the chase. I'm not even going to entertain the thought of, do they exist? What a silly question. What a stupid question. It insults your intelligence. We're going to go right to the core of the problem now. Now, first of all, I want to give you some logistics. You are fascinated by the machines. The machines have been around for a very long time, as has been documented by these grand researchers who have gone before me, and upon whose shoulders I stand. One of my jobs was to research what these guys were doing, because these guys were doing the work that intelligence agencies should have been doing, but they didn't need to, because all we had to do was listen to these guys, who were doing the footwork, the field work, and collecting the data, because the data is unclear. And it has been deliberately unclear for millennia. You are deliberately kept in the dark. A few of you understand, and a few of those people who do understand have paid for it with their life. There have been 3 attempts on my life in the last 5 years. I'm an old fox. Take me down, there's trouble. Real trouble. There's not just me. Not just me. The basic flying saucer, what a silly name, forms a toroid of electromagnetic energy, principally in the magnetic range, for the first function of its operation. I will not use the word flight. They do not fly. They translate. Here, you have a particular you have a particular electronic point of focus. Here you have a rotational magnetic field. Here you have a contradictory electromagnetic field. This gives you the fundamental shape of a flying saucer. It is constructed according to the physics which is extremely well known throughout most of the known universe. How do you think that in the billions and billions of stars that you can perceive on any one night by taking a pair of binoculars and looking at the sky, that you, the Earthlings, are the only biological life out there in here? There is it. Apart from going into other dimensions, which is a whole range of physics, difficult to explain, but I shall try. You will notice that on all craft there are 3 emission transmitters on the bottom. They may form a triangle or they may form part of a sphere with inserts within it. They are fundamental to the physics of the function of the mechanics. This has been known for a very long time. A word of warning: if you see any craft on the ground, do not go near it. Because around the side, particularly on the triangular craft, you will have ion emission ports. Sometimes thought to be portholes, they are not. Their function is to emit mesons and ions in an ionic form at very high voltage to create a toroid of ionized gas, which is not technically a gas because it's a plasma. What does that do? It can do a number of things. It can create above the craft a reduced atmospheric pressure, which is the same as what you get on an aerofoil, so you get upward lift by virtue of the air underneath pushing up. This is very old. It was used by ancient civilizations to move stones, which is why the stones had to have rollers underneath them to allow the air to get under to push up. All you do is reduce the air pressure on the upside and it will lift off the ground. It is the same as you putting something in water where a block of wood will float on water because of displacement. It's very simple stuff. Why have you not got it in your civilization now? Because you are not intended to. 2 reasons. 1, it is considered by many people that the human civilization is not capable or indeed responsible enough to have this information. And 2, various cabals and cartels have vested interest in you working with fossil fuels and everything else. As the sponsor of Nikola Tesla said just before his character assassination demise, I can't put a meter on that. Tesla, as you probably know, was about to give the world a box about the size of a large chest, which would in fact give household electricity for life for nothing. You can't put a meter on that. When a craft is on the ground, it may have legs. These legs are insulators. The last thing a UFO wants to do is touch down on the ground, because it will earth. It loses a lot of energy. It would much rather hover at approximately 1 meter or more. 1 meter of air gives you very good insulation, and it will basically there not lose energy. When various contactees have been invited aboard a craft, been lifted into the craft, either manually or actually using a tractor beam. This tractor beam produces light. It will come out of the craft very slowly because it is contained with a magnetic tube and is the same as the cathode ray tube in effect, although I'm using a metaphor as on the old television sets. You can control light by subliminal magnetic fields. You can hang on to the light. Einstein, in his last years, wanted to change all of his formulas, and they wouldn't let him because it was in the textbooks. So you can't change the textbooks. Are we there? Yeah, okay. And he wanted to change the textbooks because we now know from clinical and laboratory experiments that light can be slowed down, it can also be speeded up, so the figure of the speed of light is in fact a fallacy. Let me give you a little bit of physics on this. Light works as a wave or a particle depending on your point of view. A wave, a sine wave. If you take another sine wave and you counter this in this plane of this board, you will get 0. But you will produce a different kind of wave in a right angle plane to the one you have just created. This is to do with scalar technology. Scalar waves you cannot usually detect, but they are very, very real. And if I can give you the example, if you have a copper tube, and you have water in this tube, and you know this from the hydraulics on your brakes on your car, if you push here, the effect at the other end is immediate and is exactly the same. It does not actually mean that this molecule travels to there, it just means that moves when that moves. A scalar wave moves in exactly the same function, so scalar waves move throughout the universe instantly. There is no speed of light. You don't have to take X number of years to go between A and B. You can just be there. Now the ancients knew this. The ancients knew this. The ancients could do this. They could do it now. There are still ancients around. I will be doing in the morning a 3-hour session from 10 in this room to 1 for more detail. So don't worry if this, if you think you're losing the plot on this, don't think that you can't come back and get more detail on it. I want to go back and change tack here because I want to tell you where you came from and why. Your solar system is not part of the Milky Way. Big mistake. The Milky Way is not a swastika. That's not an Indian symbol, anyway. It's here, in this plane. It is surrounded by another galaxy. I can't represent this in 2D, but if you were in 3D, you would detect that if you look out from the surface of the Earth, and you can see the Milky Way up there, and you're working this plane here, or from the Sun, you would detect that the Milky Way is in a different plane to where you are here. Therefore, your solar system is not inherently part of what is up there at the wrong angle. This is very important. Because the other galaxy is a dwarf brown one-star galaxy. It's much older than the Milky Way, and it is in a process of decay. So your solar system with Sol at the center is in decay. But don't worry, this is going on for millions and millions of years. It's been in decay for a long time. When you're talking galactic time, you have to expand your concept into a huge time span. What does this mean? It means that the biology that you see naturally on this planet is primitive in its context to where you are today. How did that happen? Because after stitching in terms of worlds in collision, when you have two galaxies in collision, you are going to get proximity, lack of separation of objects in those two galaxies. They are going to interact. And one of them, the superior gravimetric and etheric galaxy, will absorb the lesser body. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. Cyclical. Everything is cyclical. Everything is cyclical. Nibiru, Planet X, all of that stuff. It reflects this concept. Your solar system has been changing for millennia. And Mars, as we now know, was also a seat of biological life. Bacteria has been found, identified, water, even artifacts that are anomalous to a barren desert are there now. You can go on NASA and various pages and find them. But it has suffered problems. Mars lost its atmosphere some 450,000 years ago. And what happened? Those people, perhaps in association with other people, other entities, moved to different places because their own planet had been hit by a disaster of cataclysmic volume. They could not stay. Some of their facilities are still there, underground or covered by dust, and some of them have been restored, but basically the surface civilization vanished. And many of them came here. Are you Martians? Possibly. But you may also be more. Because the people who came to Mars came from elsewhere. This transition of humanity is a universal fact. These things bring up emotions in me because I remember them. I was there. I say to you in honest sincerity, when I arrive, it is not good news. Because you need to know. Today you will learn things that you need to know. You have not been told. They do not trust you. They think you are bad. I think you are big enough to handle this. Now, going back to the history, which it's important you understand. The people who came from Mars and elsewhere and colonized this planet of Earth, third from the sun, wasn't always third from the sun, but let's call it third from the sun today, needed resources. They needed somewhere to live. But they also needed resources. They needed water, they needed an atmosphere. atmosphere, which they had lost, they needed gold, not because it was valuable. Value of gold is now a modern concept. The Inca used gold as a malleable commodity. They didn't value it like you do as coin or bullion. But the sky people needed gold for an even more valuable purpose. Two purposes. One, monoatomic gold. Not the gold stuff that you have on your fingers. That is a combination of atoms to form ordinary gold that conveys electricity, as you know very well. Monoatomic gold, by definition of the word, is one atom. It's white and it's ceramic. It's very important, and you can eat the damn stuff. And if you use that in combination with other DNA, RNA techniques, you can produce longevity. Phenomenal longevity, because your DNA which if you stretched it out, now any one of you from any one of your cells would go between here and halfway to Mars. That's how much information is in one single piece of DNA. And at the end, there's a function which is important in the DNA to the RNA interchange. And it goes RNA, DNA, DNA, RNA ad infinitum. And this function at the end is instrumental in that happening. As you get older, you lose bits of this off the end. Until when you're about 80, you might be down to 1. All this has gone. And you are left with what you have. Because as I sit here now and look at you, every one of you, bar certain cells of your brain, are no more than 6 months old. Because you have been rebuilt naturally by your body, RNA, DNA, RNA, DNA, over 6 months. So you have a new body. Why do you get old? Because of what happens here, that we are getting damage in the RNA, DNA. So the damage blueprint is remembered and you get aging. There's been a recent study found that they could actually find in here a switch, which in theory, if they move this switch, they could switch off aging. That is the claim. I'm not quite sure whether they found the right switch, but my God, there's 7 billion on the planet now. What happens if we give everybody longevity? Which we'll come to in a minute. Big problem. Now, what's all this to do with aliens? Because aliens have DNA. They might have the same DNA, but it's damn similar to yours, because you are principally a combination of primates and aliens. You are 98.4% primate. You are the remainder alien. Prior to the arrival of the colonists, you were, or whatever was there, 100% primate, and you were doing quite well. And then this happened, and 1.6% of other injection was made. Not necessarily at the one time, over a number of times. Both faults of both races are incorporated in you. Both faults and both advantages. You are durable, but you are also vulnerable. The alien is both durable and vulnerable, and you combine both. We'll go into in a moment. I've got to get my time. Time. Let's do time. Time is an illusion. There is no such thing as time. All you have is a sequence of events which you call time. An atomic clock in London, at Heathrow, is on the tarmac. And there's another one on the tarmac. You put this one on, say, a supersonic fighter, and you fly it around the world. And you look at the time on this one compared to that one, it's different. Even Einstein told you that. It's different because the action of velocity changes time. And we're talking about the ability of one set of sequences to marry to another set of sequences. How many of your clocks in your houses and works always tell the same time? How many of you have gone to bed and woken up with your watch telling you it was a slightly different time from when you went to bed according to everybody else's clocks? Maybe you changed the time because in you is a resonance frequency which can change time. Time and space are linked together. You talk about aliens. You are aliens. All of you. The only people indigenous to this planet are the animals. They're the people who belong here, not you. That's why you have some difficulty with the place. You may be aware that the Earth has expanded. From the sun, you get rays and dust and material and energy which is constantly being absorbed by the Earth's interior and causing the Earth to expand. This is a common factor to all planetary bodies. Hence, when the dinosaurs were around, you had that amount of G, that amount of gravity. Then you had more G, then you had more G. If you take a brontosaurus, if indeed they existed, it could not stand on your planet today. Its legs would collapse because it lived at a time when the gravity was less, because the mass was less. You are in constant change, but it happens cyclically over time. Aliens, as you call them, are aware of that. They came here, and around about 250,000 years ago, when they were mining gold and living relatively in small numbers, because when you talk about alien civilizations compared to the human civilization, you are talking a vast difference in numbers. You're talking about numbers of UFOs in the skies. How many actually are there up there compared to the aircraft that I see every day flying over my house? Just a few. Sometimes there are more than just a few. 250,000 years ago, they decided to create not a slave but a helper. This is documented. Read your ancient texts, you'll find it there. And they created man, new man, after the gods with a small g. The purpose of this creation was to take the work away from the hands of the heroes, as it says in the Sumerian text, who were doing the mining. In South Africa, the companies there sometimes mine down 20,000 feet and find perfect shafts with such an accuracy of laser precision that they don't know what they are, so they wall them up. There is an official policy in mining that if you find something that doesn't fit, you bury it. Like the Navy says, if you can't explain it away, destroy it. And the mines in South Africa, from the central point of South Africa right down the way through, number between 10 to 20 million small gold mines. Why so many? Because they were over 250,000 years. That's quite small, they're not like modern mines. They use acoustics. And you've touched on here with Warminster about sound and acoustics. Early man of your species knew about acoustics and resonance. There's a book over there I've donated called In the Name of the Gods, touches on it. There's a few of them available on the web, I think. I had a very minor amount to do with that, only post-production. The human voice range is extraordinarily important in activating resonance. When you go to the pyramid, you have chambers. Let's just deal with one, rather than complicating it. And it's said to you that this was a tomb. I don't think so. And in these tombs was found absolutely nothing. Because the importance of them is the space. An organ pipe contains nothing. Thank you for nodding. Contains nothing. What it contains is a tone. And the tone will modify the air and the ether or the aether which is in it. Up until a few tens of years ago, maybe 100 years ago, there was a concept of aether or ether. We don't like to use the term now because we can't explain it and we can't manipulate it. Well, some people can. Behind all matter is aether, ether. Behind you is your spirit. Your spirit is my concern. You will eventually die, all of you, biologically. My best friend is in the hospital right now. You know there is more to you than what is sitting there. You know you go on. Otherwise, what's the point of life? You are here in a school, one of the hardest schools known, to learn about your deficiencies, of which I have many. As with you, otherwise I would not be here. You are here to learn about life, not about death. Although in the ancient world, death was seen as a transition to another life. The Egyptians spent most of their time preparing for the next life, creating thought forms, creating artifacts, creating concepts about something that they would go to. They spent most of their life preparing for what they would go to, not what was evident in their life that day. They lived in hope, they did not live in fear. You are invited to live in fear. It's the most fundamental con that could be put upon you. While we're there, you're probably aware that there were some shafts that went out of the chambers. They were actually blanked off. They were not through to the chamber and they were blanked off there. And you probably recall a little robot crawling up it, quite small. The shafts, literally like draw them in reality, are about that dimension. They are sighting lines. And they go to, what a surprise, Orion. Because Orion is one of your closest associated systems. Let's do that. Keep an eye on the time. Who are the aliens? Well, you are, totally. You have a number of aliens, more than you could possibly recognize. Let's consider a metaphor. Here is the Pacific Ocean. Australia's down there somewhere. And you are Hawaii. We say you're Hawaii. And you have a small indigenous population. And you have people who are traveling across here. And people are traveling across here. And people are traveling across here. And they're going past Hawaii, where they need resources. So you're a way station that is useful for picking up resources. You're more than that. You're also a safari park. And you have game wardens. You are the wildebeest and the zebra, and there's a few lions and tigers out there, and you have a few overseers who basically try not to interact with you because they would consider that as damaging your cultural evolution. Whenever a higher civilization comes into contact with a technologically lesser civilization, it usually has a detrimental effect. You've seen this in colonization throughout the last 300-400 years. It's very difficult for the lesser civilization to not place the higher civilization on some kind of pedestal and treat them as gods. And it might well be that the higher civilization likes to be treated as gods. And that's what happened when the helper, who was there for all that period of time, became a free man, as they would say in the States. The con was that the higher civilization who had run the place were now elevated to the level of gods. And they played along with that because that served their purpose admirably. So the helper became a disciple or pupil or subservient willing slave, as opposed to one who just said go here, go there. He wanted the people who repaired, I'm talking very accurately, the Great Pyramids, actually willingly gave up their services to please the gods. Outside the Sphinx, there's a stele from Tutmosis III that says, I did this. No, he didn't, he only repaired the pores. You can see the blocks in the pores that he repaired. Egyptians were very fond of putting up stele saying, I did this. It's a human characteristic. You recognize it. I hear you saying, and by the way, I've all given you a card, and in a little while, I'd like you, with whatever writing materials you've got available, or one of these pens, to write on that card, if you want to, a question of no more than 5 words or 6 words. Reason being, I don't want discourse, I don't want a lecture. Okay, you've only got 5 or 6 words for a question. And tomorrow morning I will have read all of those cards and I will try and answer every single question. Would you also please to write the number of your key ticket so that you are anonymous, but if I say, hey, by the way, 89, the answer to your question is, then 89 knows that I'm responding to that question. Right, we're losing the track, losing the time. Now, who is coming here? Who's going past the island? Who's making a stopover? Who lives here apart from you? Well, many. start with the ones that are the problems. Epsilon Eridani, second planet out. Problem. Treat you as a resource. Syrians. Comme ci, comme ça. Lyrans. Quite nice people, Lyrans. Pleiadians. Who are the Pleiadians? You are technically part of the Pleiadian spiral. Here's the galaxy. So many spirals. You are part of here. In the intercourse of that one to that one, you are on the end of the line of the Pleiadian spiral, which is 129 suns. You are number 129. And counting. The Pleiadians feel sorry for you. They give you the benefit of the doubt. You do some terrible things. And the people who are above you do even worse. Pleiadians look a lot like me. Thousands came here. Some of you in this audience today. Most of you forget. Please don't forget. We are losing the battle, friends. To whom? Well, the people who regard you as a resource. Who and what do they do to you? Well, you started off as helpers, and then something happened about 10 to 12,000 years ago, which is biblically recorded and recorded in all ancient literature, which is called the flood. History before that was by definition antediluvian, anti before the flood. The civilization which was, thank you very much, was pandemic to the earth, all over the earth. Some have called it, or given it the name Lemuria or Mu, which is just an invention, but it gives a concept, was here for 250,000, maybe 450,000 years. They used natural energy, they used pyramids, they used stone. If you go to the sarcophagi, which was allegedly for the burial chambers of bulls, and it is a load of bull, you'll find that the sarcophagi are massive structures with a lid, which is like that. And this sarcophagi weighs 100 tons, and it only got down there because it got in there when they built the catacomb, because you can't get it out the door. In the same way you can't get out the sarcophagus that is actually in the king's chamber, because there's not room to get it out the door. And they are very thick, about that thick. And they are made principally out of forms of granite. And for any of you know about phonographs, you will know that at the end of a phonograph on a needle, there's a pickup, and there's a record, and this little vibration is causing a piezoelectric effect on that crystal, which is giving an electric current to the gramophone, which gives you sound out of that little crystal. Now, if you consider that you've got a sarcophagi, you've got a pyramid chamber, which is hundreds and hundreds of tons, how much electricity do you think you will get out of it if you resonate it? A hell of a lot. And what's more, you will get a piezoelectric plasma effect, such that if you go into such chambers which are resonance tuned and you sing and overtone the right level of sound, you will produce manifestations. There is a technique in the lab by which you have a chamber and you have a loudspeaker and you have another loudspeaker and you do this with the sound and things will levitate using sound. Using sound. Sound is fundamental. It's an acoustic wavelength. It is different from an electromagnetic wavelength. and you can use sound. And the lamas in Nepal and in the Himalaya, before they were educated, used to use sound using horns and cymbals vibrating. Imagine a number of these in an arc to a focal point where there was a block. This was witnessed by a clone officer in about the 1930s, and the block would levitate by the same method I referred to before, up the cliff to whatever they were building up here in this cave over there. In your being, in your sound, in your meditation with sound, you have phenomenal abilities. You have the ability to see, to travel, to move, to influence, and to block. To block because you are being impacted all the time by sounds that are from systems that are designed to keep you in line, keep all the ducks in line. Excuse me a moment. My DNA is in much better shape than yours. Warminster refers, and my previous colleague referred to sound. What was that? Very easy to explain. Infrasound. Infrasound is about 7 hertz. You can't hear 7 hertz, you can feel it. The French were trying to develop an acoustic weapon at 7 hertz. Most of the scientists who were working on the project died. They exploded because your organs have resonance frequencies which are around about 7 hertz. You have ultra frequencies running into megahertz, and all of you use bloody microwave, don't you? I've got one here. I'll show you a trick. Just a regular Mickey Mouse iPhone. Now I want to show you something. This could save your life. There's that. It's switched off 90% of the time, or put it on aeroplane mode. And behind it, in this pouch, there's that. Now there's an ordinary piece of cardboard with some baker foil wrapped around it. Wrapped around it several times, it has to meet at the edges. Acts as a shield. Bounces the transmissions away from your body because you make most of your white cells in your pelvis. American ladies keep their things here in their bra and they get a high incidence of breast cancer. Because if you change the microwave frequency of the metabolism of the cell, you will produce rogue DNA, RNA, and you will produce something that doesn't know where to go, and that's what you call a carcinogenic disease. That's called cancer. I think got more. Now, while on that, you have a serious problem. Not you personally, you're actually relatively shielded from it, called Fukushima, or Fukushima. And that was a particular kind of nuclear power station that suffered a tsunami and melted down. 3 of the cores went through in 3 days, and is issuing 450 metric tons of radioactive water in the Pacific every single day. Cesium-137, strontium-90, Cesium-134, and a whole bunch of other shit. And it's 40 degrees Californian coast. Mrs. Clinton had an answer to this. She stopped monitoring it. Because what you don't know about, or what the Americans don't know about, you don't need. It takes about 15 years. A friend of mine was on the team that went to Chernobyl, flying into Chernobyl. He was 66 years old at the time, and his Geiger counter mechanism was going off the scale. He said, I wasn't bothered. It's way down the line for me. I'd be dying anyway for jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. But the younger members of the team, that was quite serious at that time. eat anything out of the Northeast Pacific. Unless you want to go and, go and take some cyanide and be quicker than this. But that's just about a minor thing. That's in the water. Just out of interest, for those of you asking the question, before it gets to the Atlantic is 7 years. Because of deep Atlantic currents that start in the Indian Ocean, come around up the coast of South America, over across the Atlantic, and back again. 7 years. You have 7 years before the Atlantic is equally contaminated as is the North Pacific. You see the problems I have to deal with. There are no answers. You just have to eat from fish farms on land. Don't eat seafood in the Northeast Pacific. I digress. I am not a ufologist. I have never been a ufologist. I am an analyst. I analyze data. Lots and lots of data. Millions of bits of data. On all kinds of things. I was invited to do some study in my younger days, which resulted in Warminster and a number of other things. And then Wales, let's cover Wales. We're on the subject. Went to Wales, paid to go to Wales, West Wales, where the focus went. Brawdy. What was Brawdy? Brawdy was a undercover, bit of a joke, US oceanographic submarine listening station, by which you send out, you put out microphones into the Atlantic. There's one in Newfoundland and one in Greenland, and you listen to the noise, the infrasound of propellers, and you can identify the individual boat. And you can identify where it is, where it's going, who's on it. You can hear a Russian, if you listen very carefully. Or if you're not interested in the Russians, you can hear something else. And you also pick up anomalous readings. Objects that are moving at 150 knots underwater. A nuclear submarine, if you're lucky, will do 48 knots underwater. They just drift about with their engines turned off in effect, because any decent spy satellite will pick up the warm water coming out the back of the nuclear site. We've known that since 1964. Brawdy was looking at subs and looking at UFOs, or USOs. And the aliens but bloody hell, not too keen on this guy, mate. So we'll take a look at you. So the aliens started looking at Brawdy. And lo and behold, Sun, I think, coined the phrase, the word triangle. They invented it, and then I was paid to go down there, the current writing a book, and find what the hell was going on. And it turned out that people were seeing infusions, intrusions into the base. And these guys were pretty smart. They could actually interface with the computers. They could inject false images. They could take down the computers. They could switch them off. They could switch them on, and they could walk through fences, which is very alarming if you're a GI carrying an M16. And then, not in that instance, but in other cases in Americas, when they're trying to fire an M16, when the weapon disintegrates in front of you with a flash and you're left with a pile of ash on the ground, that's a little bit disquieting. Why do governments not admit to UFOs? Because they can't do anything about it. If you've just come out of the Second World War and won against two major nations, Japan and Germany, and you were suddenly confronted with a series of so-called crashes, how are you going to go to your people and say, we've just won their freedom, chaps, but hang on, there's these guys out there who can run circles around everything we know. How are you going to say that? You can't possibly say that. Forrester wanted to say that. A relative, a friend of mine who's now in hospital fighting for his life. Natural causes. They killed Forrestal. They threw him out of a window 16 floors up, and it was just a naval hospital, I believe. He wanted to tell you, good man, you are not fit to know. That's what everybody says. Look at the time. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, I will be going into more detail. Today is very much a sketchy kind of overview. I apologise if I'm leaving holes in this. I usually give 2 to 3 hours. I haven't given a lecture for 17 years. I write memos about 3 times a day to the idiots who run your bloody countries, trying to get them to listen. But no, they are politicians, aren't they? And they know better than you. Right, where should we go now? Think. So, where are you now? Dare we tell you where you are now? You are on the brink. Why are you on the brink? Because people are playing brinkmanship. And this is to do with something called ego. It's also to do with money. And it's also to do with control. And this is a very complex subject. Various people think you can change your systems. I don't think you can. I think you're locked into money. You've had it for a very long time, thousands of years. I don't think it can change. I think what needs to be changed is attitude. It's not money that is the root of evil. It's what people do with it. I see it as a control. Now, business as usual. Everything was going along tickety-boo, and then some time ago, things got a bit out of hand. And we have the Chinese. I'm not going to say too much about this, but the Chinese suddenly became probably the principal superpower in the world, truth be known, economically. I don't say militarily, but economically. And various people who should be nameless, but you could look to the West, are trying to have an impact on the Chinese in a most irresponsible manner. My job is to stop you blowing yourself up. Well, on 2 instances I've succeeded in doing that, along with a lot of other people. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You don't know how close you came. You came close. You're coming close again. Whoever, whatever, whether it be human or AI, which stands for artificial intelligence, has to be stopped. Because AI intelligence has no respect of human life. When Arthur C. Clarke wrote his famous work, and the computer HAL is eliminating the humans on the flight because they are the inefficient element of the mission, you are in nearly exactly the same position right now. This is what Stephen Hawking was referring to. Be wary of AI. Because if you give over your civilization and your military to AI, you are toast. The Chinese switched off their supercomputer half an hour after something happened, which I'm not going into. That was a very wise decision, because if one supercomputer starts fighting another supercomputer, God only knows what happens. What happened going back 12,000, 10,000, 10,600, doesn't really matter. What happened to lose all this civilization? What happened that you can go on the web and find beautiful pyramids sitting on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean just off Cuba, I believe. You can go around various other parts of the world, you can find pyramids, you can find ancient civilization, artifacts. What happened? Well, we don't really know. I'm trying to find out, but certainly something happened. There was an ice age just prior to it, which means your poles were principally iced up. And then when ice melts, as with a glacier, it does a very funny thing. It forms a dam at the front edge. Always does this, never quite worked out why. And behind you get meltwater, and the meltwater builds up pressure, and it starts to undermine the glacial dam until eventually it cracks and gives way. And then you have huge tsunami-type floods. This is why you can find superficial because what we know is that this moved by 3¼ degrees. The actual rotational pivot of the Earth moved by 3¼ degrees. Now, if you're in a car, one of the old exercises when I was working for the people was, I'm an advanced driver, is you put a glass on the dashboard of the car with water probably up there, and you have to drive at 60 miles an hour and do all kinds of manoeuvres and not have the glass spill over and spill water. You know as well as I do, if you make any kind of acceleration or deceleration, that water will pop over that glass. Now equally you've got oceans, and if you move the dynamic of those oceans, this is what happened in Fukushima in a different way, which I've explained, you're going to get a lot of water moving. And a tsunami is different from a wave. This is a wave. A tsunami is a wall of water which is heading in that direction. So when the first wave hits, this behind here keeps on coming. If any of you looked at the Fukushima onshore footage, you will see that's what happens. It just keeps coming. It's not a wave. It's a tsunami. You get a tsunami 600 feet high, you've got problems. In South Africa, where I'm referring to the gold mines, there's a tremendous amount of silt that covered up many of those gold mines. That's why you can only see them from the air with infrared photography. And if you work out how much silt would need to be deposited on Southern Africa to get to that inland area, that's a hell of a wave that would do that, carrying all that silt. The other thing about tsunami is they carry a lot of debris. As we've seen in the Fukushima, they carry a lot of debris. Moving along. Getting rather tangential here, I apologise. Where the hell does UFOs coming into this? We've moved a long way. UFO is no more than me talking about your bloody cars. Do I refer to you as he's got a Ford Escort and he's got a Jaguar? No, it's not what the car is, it's who's in it and what they're doing. Perhaps it's a Centurion tank, perhaps it's an ambulance. Don't spend your time wasting whether you know whether there's cars out there or not, please. There was a project in the States, television, old television, category tube. These people were in communication for 12 years with information beamed into the television from the aliens, technical stuff, educational stuff. The aliens gave up. They said they were too slow, and the Americans complained they had made no money out of the information that they had received. Aliens don't use money. What a silly idea. Money was invented years, decades ago. It's a method of rationing your poverty, not wealth. Wealth is goodwill and love, and giving, and sharing. 5 minutes. So where do we go from there? What the hell do we do? Right, I'm going to give you 3 things you can do. Think about it. I would say, for the purpose of security purposes, everything I've said in the last hour is complete fiction. I made it up. There are less than 150 people in this room and we are not on television. I know the rules. It's all fiction. Don't even think about it. That gets me off. Now, go away and talk about it. Talk to people who you think will listen. Don't bother with talking to the idiots who've got no other interest than pizza and listening to Homer Simpson. What a waste of time. Do not become aggressive. That does not work. Revolutions only revolve to their point of origin. They achieve absolutely. You have to grow up. Not just in this room, because this message may go out in probably different areas, nor, but some of you